Oggi Lenny.
I'm standing here in my dad's empty office right now. He just did some painting and priming and then put some trim up in the ceiling. It's really bare, as you can see behind me and then in these pictures as well. Hopefully I can make it look a little bit better from bringing some stuff in, so stay tuned for the rest of the process. I began by assembling the two carcasses that were going to be in the corners. That would be C4 and C5, and then C7, 8, 9, 10, 11 together. This was a real beating because I was dealing with two pieces that were joined together at a 90-degree angle. Next time I do this, I'll probably just make straight runs, so that way I can build them in my shop and then not have to deal with putting them all together in a small room like my dad's office, which is about 11 by 11. Right now I'm using the same assembly method that I used in that first chunk in part 1 of this series. If you wanted to, kind of see a detailed walkthrough of that, go ahead and click on part 1 and then check that video out. I'll have a link in the description. Now it was time to attach the pedestal on the bottom side. I made good cuts in my shop for the pre-assembly part, so these went together really smoothly and easily. One thing that I did realize though is I do not have near enough 6-inch clamps to be able to put all this together. I only had about, I want to say 12 with me, so I had to continue shifting them around with all these different pieces. Now it was time to attach the nailer strip on the back. This is in one of those 90-degree corners, so I already joined a couple boards together using pocket holes and glue. In order to have a nice tight fit with these face frame pieces, I decided to go ahead and join them together with some screws, so I went ahead and countersunk and then drove 2.5-inch screws through them. With some glue and my brad nailer, it was now time to attach the face frame to the carcass. Assembling these two face frame pieces was a little bit different because there's no vertical support right there in the middle of that corner. I decided to use some pocket holes and then some glue to attach them together. Reason being is that little corner section right there is going to have two doors on it that are attached to each other and no vertical support to get in the way. A few parts of these cabinets needed some shelf pin holes, so I used this handy Craig shelf pin hole jig, and it actually worked out pretty well. Now it was time to assemble the drawers. I had two drawers in the desk column that were going to be about 6 inches tall, so I just went ahead and used 1/2-inch prefabricated and pre-finished maple for those. For all of these drawers I used a lock rabbit joint in all the corners. It was actually a really easy setup if you've got a dado stack on your table saw. I did a dry fit just to make sure I cut all the pieces correctly. Now it was time to cut out the drawer base out of 1/4-inch thick plywood. I had 7 drawers with the same dimensions, so I went ahead and cut the bases all at once. It was now time to cut the material for the file drawers. I used 3/4-inch thick plywood because it's much thicker and sturdier than 1/2-inch, and it's going to be able to support the files much better. Since these pieces of plywood weren't pre-finished or pre-fabricated, I needed to cut the groove in the bottom to accept the drawer base. Setup was pretty easy. I just used a 1/4-inch wide dado stack and then raised it up about 3/8 of an inch high and then set it a 1/2 inch from the fence. In order to fancy up these plywood drawers, I went ahead and applied iron-on edge banding to the top sides of them. I talked with my cabinet contact that builds cabinets professionally in California and asked him why it was taking so long to do this process, and he suggested that I just get the non-iron-on edge banding and then use contact cement, and I can absolutely see how that would make the job go a lot faster. And for trimming, I need to buy a small router that's got a good flush trim bit on it. Now it's time to cut the lock rabbets for these 3/4 inch drawers. The setup is really easy if you've got a dado stack on your table saw. You just take your material thickness and then divide by 2, and that's a measurement you're going to use a few times. The material thickness is 3/4 inches, so I got a 3/8 inch thick dado stack on there. And I raised that dado stack up 3/8 of an inch, and then also set the nearest part of the blade 3/8 of an inch from the fence. Now it's time to cut an 1/8 inch wide gap on the top of these drawers. That 1/8 inch gap is going to be accepting the 1/8 inch thick steel piece that is going to be used for setting the files on. Since my table saw blade was 3/32 of an inch, I had to go ahead and take a second pass on this to get it to an 1/8 inch wide. The dry fit was good, so it was time to go ahead and glue it up. After cutting the steel pieces down to size, I went ahead and put them in. They fit nice and snug. And then I went ahead and put in a file folder as well, and it fit just perfect. Had a little 1/8 inch gap on the sides, so that was just exactly how I wanted it. After 3 coats of spray lacquer and some sanding, it was time to install. For me, this was a 3-part process to install. The first step was installing this little nailer strip on the inside. This would be used to screw the drawer slide to. The next step was to install the slides. I used Rockler's Jig It, and it worked out really well. It was really easy to use. The third and final step in the process was to go ahead and screw on the drawer. I used a couple more Rockler jigs for this, and those surprisingly worked out really well also. After attaching the last screws, it was time to see how I did. Like butter. Installing these 15 drawers was a lot easier than building them and then clear coating them. That's where I'm going to end part 2 of this series. Next up we'll be building the raised panel doors and then the faces for all these drawers. So be sure to tune into that. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hopefully you guys get a chance to build some of your own. Thank you guys for checking in.